If you think the world's already fair, wait until you hear this. Imagine walking into a dealership where every gleaming car costs more than most people AS homes, where glass walls shine like diamonds and the smell of new leather feels like success. Now imagine being thrown out of that same place just because someone decided you didn't look like you could afford it. Stick around to the end, because what happens next will make you cheer. And hey, before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss stories that prove karma has the best sense of justice. The morning was bright, the kind that makes everything look sharper, clearer, almost cruelly honest. Ava Morgan parked her modest gray sedan across the street from the Carrington Luxury Motors dealership in downtown Atlanta. She'd been saving for years. 2 jobs, freelancing on weekends, and more overtime than anyone should ever take to buy herself her dream car, a sleek, black Aston Martin Vantage. It wasn't just about the car. It was about the feeling of arriving, of telling the world she'd made it despite every closed door, every doubt, every time someone assumed she wasn't supposed to be in the room. She adjusted her blazer, took a deep breath, and crossed the street. The glass doors slid open, releasing a wave of cold air and polished confidence. The dealership was like a cathedral of wealth, marble floors, crystal lights, and glossy brochures that looked like art pieces. Ava smiled, walking toward the front desk where 2 salesmen stood chatting, both tall, both wearing suits a little too shiny to be real confidence. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm but professional. "I'd like to test drive the Aston Martin Vantage, the 2024 model. The one in black, if possible." One of the salesmen, his name tag said Trent, gave her a long, slow look from head to toe. His expression flickered with something like surprise, then amusement. "That's quite the car," he said finally. "It's over 200 grand. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Ava's smile didn't falter. "Yes. I did my research. I'm ready to make a purchase decision today if the drive goes well." The second salesman chuckled quietly and leaned toward Trent, muttering something Ava couldn't catch, though she caught the sound of the word pretending. Trent crossed his arms. "We usually require an appointment for high-value vehicles. Do you have one?" "I called yesterday," Ava said, pulling her phone from her purse and scrolling through her emails. "I spoke with a receptionist, Lisa, I think, and she said walk-ins were fine." Trent's eyes darted to his colleague, who shrugged. Then he said, "Well, Lisa shouldn't have told you that. These cars aren't really for casual visitors." The words hung there like smoke. Ava's stomach tightened. She knew this tone, polite enough to stay safe, but sharp enough to wound. She kept her voice steady. "I'm not a casual visitor. I'm a serious buyer." Before Trent could reply, a man in a tailored gray suit, clearly the manager, stepped out from his glass office. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, his voice smooth but bored. "Just a misunderstanding," Ava said quickly. "I'm here to test drive the Vantage." The manager's smile was professional and cold. "I'm afraid all our test drives are fully booked today." Ava frowned. "That's strange. There are 3 of them sitting on the floor right there." He looked her in the eye and said, "Ma'am, this is a private dealership. We reserve the right to deny service if we believe a request isn't genuine." The words hit her like a slap. "Not genuine," she repeated softly. "You think I'm lying about wanting to buy?" Trent smirked, pretending to scroll through his tablet. "It's just that these cars attract a lot of attention. People come in all the time wanting photos or pretending they can buy. It's a waste of our time." Ava could feel people watching now, the receptionist pretending to be busy, a couple near the corner staring, whispering. Her pulse pounded in her ears. "I'm not pretending," she said. "I have the funds. I can show proof of income if you—" The manager held up a hand, cutting her off. "That won't be necessary. Please leave before we have to call security." It felt like everything froze. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd misheard. "You're kicking me out?" He didn't even answer. He just turned and walked away. Ava's throat burned. Every ounce of pride screamed for her to shout, to demand, to fight. But she also knew what would happen if she did, how quickly a woman like her could be labeled aggressive, how the story would twist before she could even tell it. So she swallowed the rage, turned, and walked out with her head high. Outside, the wind hit her face hard. She sat in her car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying not to cry. The dealership's glass walls glinted in the sun, reflecting her small sedan back at her like a cruel joke. She drove home in silence, her mind racing, not just with anger, but with ideas. Ava wasn't just any buyer. She was a tech consultant who'd recently sold her first startup, quietly, privately, for nearly 7 figures. She didn't flaunt it. She never needed to. But something about the humiliation today ignited a new fire. By the time she reached her apartment, her sadness had turned into focus. She opened her laptop, typed for hours, made calls, sent emails. When she finally closed the computer that night, she whispered, "Tomorrow, they'll remember me." The next morning, Ava arrived at the same dealership. But she wasn't alone. 3 black SUVs followed her, each one with tinted windows. The dealership staff looked up, confused, as the convoy pulled into the lot. The glass doors opened again, and this time, Ava didn't walk in as a customer. She walked in as the new regional investor liaison representing Vanguard Automotive Group, the corporation that had just finalized its acquisition of Carrington Luxury Motors overnight. Trent's jaw dropped. The manager stepped forward, color draining from his face. Miss Morgan?" he stammered. "What's going on here?" Ava smiled slightly, the kind that held all the power she'd been denied yesterday. "You remember me. Good. You'll be seeing a lot of me." A suited man behind her, one of the Vanguard representatives, handed the manager a folder. "Effective immediately," he said. "Vanguard Automotive has purchased this location and is conducting a full staff review." A murmur spread across the showroom. Trent looked from the manager to Ava, panic setting in. "Wait, what does that mean?" "It means," Ava said, "we're cleaning house." By noon, the dealership was in chaos. Phones rang unanswered, employees whispered in corners, and security escorted Trent and his colleague out after discovering customer complaints that had been ignored for months. The manager tried to argue, but the documents were clear. He'd been under investigation for discrimination reports, and Ava's experience was the last straw. She stood in the middle of the gleaming floor, watching it all unfold. The same marble, the same glass, but now the reflection staring back at her wasn't humiliation. It was victory. Still, Ava didn't smile, not fully. She knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about change. She turned to the Vanguard team. "We're keeping this place," she said, "but we're rebuilding it from the ground up, and this time we treat everyone with respect." That afternoon, she watched the sun dip behind the dealership's massive windows. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to prove herself. The world could doubt her, judge her, push her out, but she'd always find her way back in. And this time she wasn't leaving quietly. The following days blurred into a storm of press releases, phone calls, and whispered disbelief. The story of what happened at Carrington Luxury Motors spread faster than wildfire. At first, it was just local buzz, a short clip taken by a customer who had filmed Ava being escorted out the day before the firing. Then, as if the internet had been waiting for a new symbol of poetic justice, the clip went viral. Millions of views in hours. Comment sections exploded. "That's what happens when you judge people by their skin instead of their success," one comment read. "She handled it like a queen," another wrote. By the end of the week, Ava Morgan had become the face of quiet retribution, not that she'd asked for it. She didn't check her notifications. She didn't read the headlines. She didn't need to. She was focused on something else now, rebuilding. Vanguard Automotive S-Board had not only backed her vision, but appointed her interim director of customer relations for the entire Southeast Division. For someone who had once walked out of that same building humiliated, the irony was sharp enough to cut glass. But Ava wasn't here to gloat. She had a plan, one that reached beyond a single dealership. Her first move was transparency. She ordered the financial and HR audits to be made public to the staff. No secrets, no hidden numbers, no excuses. Then she arranged an all-hands meeting. It was held on a Friday morning, 1 week after the firings. The staff, nervous and uncertain, filled the showroom that once echoed with arrogance and pretense. Ava stood at the front, wearing the same black blazer she'd worn the day she'd been thrown out. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm was enough to silence the room. "I'm not here to talk about the past," she began, her tone smooth but firm. "You've all seen what happened. You've read the news. But I'm not interested in punishment. I'm interested in purpose." Eyes darted nervously between her and the Vanguard executive standing near the back. "This dealership lost its soul," Ava continued. "It forgot that people buy cars because they dream, because they want to feel seen. The moment we treat customers like numbers, or worse, like outsiders, we lose the only thing that keeps us alive: trust." A man in the second row spoke up. "Are we all being replaced?" His voice shook slightly. Ava met his eyes. "No, but you'll have to earn your place. Everyone here starts fresh. New training, new leadership, new accountability. If you can't stand behind what this company will become, there's the door." No one moved. Some shifted uncomfortably, but most stayed silent, understanding the weight of what she was offering. Not mercy, but a second chance under the sharp gaze of someone who'd been underestimated too many times. After the meeting, Ava returned to her temporary office, the same glass room the old manager had ruled from. It felt strange to sit in that chair. She remembered the smirk on his face when he told her to leave, the way he hadn't even considered she might belong here. Now the space was hers, but she didn't feel triumphant. She felt the quiet pressure of expectation. Late that night, as the city lights stretched across the windows, she received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Ms. Morgan," the voice said smoothly. "This is Richard Carrington." Ava froze. Carrington, the founder, the man whose name was still plastered on the building even though Vanguard now owned it. "Mr. Carrington," she said carefully, "I didn't expect to hear from you." "I imagine not," he replied. His tone was clipped, but oddly curious. "You've made quite an impression in a very short time." "I'm just doing what's necessary," Ava said. "You embarrassed my former staff," he said, not angrily, but with cold amusement, "and made national headlines doing it. You know what that means, don't you?" "That they embarrassed themselves," she answered evenly. There was a pause, then a faint chuckle. "Fair point. Still, you've disrupted an industry that thrives on image. People like you don't usually last long at the top unless you have protection." Ava leaned back in her chair. "Maybe I don't need protection." "Everyone needs protection," he said quietly. "And everyone has something to lose." Then he hung up. The line went dead, leaving a silence that felt heavier than before. Ava sat there for a long time, staring at the city, her reflection flickering faintly in the glass. Something in his tone had unsettled her. It wasn't a threat. Not quite. It was a warning, laced with knowledge of how ruthless corporate politics could be. She had stepped into a game that played dirtier than anything she'd faced before. The next morning, her assistant, a young intern named Eli, burst into her office. "Ms. Morgan, you need to see this." He handed her a tablet with a news headline. "Carrington founder accuses Vanguard of hostile takeover. Calls new director unqualified." The article was brutal. It framed Ava as an inexperienced opportunist, a diversity token, and implied that her viral fame had pressured Vanguard into a PR stunt. Ava felt the sting but refused to let it show. She knew how stories could twist truth into spectacle. She closed the article and set the tablet aside. "Let them talk," she said. "We'll show them what qualified looks like." But as the days passed, the tension grew. Reporters camped outside the dealership. Anonymous emails began arriving, small jabs at first. "You don't belong here." "You're ruining a legacy." Then worse, personal attacks. A photo of her apartment building, her car. Vanguard's legal team advised her to stay low. "This kind of pushback happens," they said. "The old guard doesn't like change." But Ava wasn't one to hide. Instead, she doubled down. She brought in community outreach programs, hosted open houses for first-time buyers, and gave free business seminars for women and minorities interested in the auto industry. The dealership's sales rose 40% in 3 months. Customer satisfaction skyrocketed. But the more successful she became, the more dangerous the whispers grew. One night, while leaving the building, she noticed a man leaning against her car. Sleek suit, pale smile. She recognized him instantly. Richard Carrington. "You don't scare easily," he said, stepping closer. "Should I?" Ava asked. He smiled faintly. "No, but you should be careful. You're playing with power you don't understand. Vanguard didn't buy my name. They leased it. And when that contract expires, so does your protection." He handed her a thin envelope and walked away. Inside was a single page, a copy of a clause buried deep in the dealership acquisition contract. It stated that the Carrington name and rights could revert to Richard if Vanguard Southeast performance dropped for 2 consecutive quarters. Ava read it twice, then again. It wasn't a threat, it was a countdown. That night, she didn't sleep. She replayed every decision she'd made, every target she'd hit, every risk she'd taken. She had built momentum, but one bad quarter could unravel it all. The next day, she called her core team into the conference room. "We're not just keeping this dealership," she said. "We're building a model that no one can tear down. If we hit our next benchmarks, we don't just secure this place, we change the entire game." Her voice carried something fierce now, something unbreakable. Even Eli, who'd been timid at first, stood taller as she spoke. Over the next months, they transformed Carrington Motors into something Atlanta had never seen. The showroom became a destination, not just for luxury buyers, but for anyone who wanted to experience excellence without prejudice. The media began to shift their narrative, too. "The woman who rebuilt a broken industry," one headline read. But Richard Carrington wasn't done. He was waiting, watching. And when the next twist came, it wouldn't be in the form of words or warnings. It would be in the form of sabotage. Because the closer Ava got to success, the more dangerous her enemies became. And soon, one act would threaten to take everything from her. Again.